Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of the onGamers Roundtable. I'm Hunter Leigh, and I'm here in studio with Spellsy.
Hello.
And down in Santa Monica, as usual, is Travis.
Hunter, which roundtable is this, though? You said the onGamers Roundtable.
It
Are we
is.
talking about Dota? Are we talking about Hearthstone?
We're talking about League of Legends non-stop today. Non-stop. Starting out first with the CLG situation. They were recently banned and fined by Riot Korea / Riot headquarters. A nominal ban for the players, the 4 players, the non-Seraph players on CLG of $1,200 or so, and a 2-year ban from KESPA on competing in any KESPA authorized Korean events. Travis, what are your thoughts on this? Is this a big deal for CLG?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is actually a really big deal. At first, I thought Seraph was involved somehow too, but obviously he got out because he wasn't account sharing. But I don't know. I've gone back and forth on my thoughts on this. I think it is a big deal because CLG in the past has said, along with Cloud9, that they've considered going to OG, and the only thing that was preventing them was scheduling conflicts. So if they ever wanted to do something like that, now they really can't. Another thing is that there was some discussion in the past, I mean, this is probably like early Season 3, late Season 2, where Doublelift had said in an interview or two that he had wanted to possibly join like a Korean team at some point in time. You gotta wonder, maybe he would have considered doing that in the later years of his career, or if something happened with CLG or anything like that. Now, in my opinion, there's really no chance of him ever being able to fulfill that plan, because by the time that he, like, ban is over, he's going to be a lot older, and that's obviously when skills start to decay. So I think that the ban itself is a pretty big deal. It's also a really big, like, I mean, even if they would have never gone, it's a big statement, I think, from Riot Korea. And I also think that the fine is pretty big from Riot headquarters, depending on how you look at it. I mean, it's a 5K fine across the team, obviously $1,250 to each, and there's been bigger for personal, but it's a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are
The
your
fine
thoughts?
is a lot more than they usually do, for like other punishments. But I think the interesting thing to me was when I first read it, I thought it was like, wow, this is a huge kind of punishment for such a small offense. Like, I think that they were account sharing not because to be like malicious or something, but they just moved to a new country and wanted to scrim, and so they had to find accounts of it. And so I thought it was like a really hefty punishment. But then I found like a statement by Riot Korea in like 2013 November, where they said like explicitly, like, if anybody is caught account sharing, then they get banned 2 years in OGN. And nobody really made a fuss at all when that rule came into place in November or whatever. So it's kind of crazy, though, to see it implemented on a foreign team such as CLG.
Right. Do you think Riot's hands were tied? They had no choice but to hand out some kind of extreme punishment since it was such a public version of account sharing they were doing?
I think that they just, if you get caught, then it was like very well worded in the Riot Korea rules. It was like, if you get caught account sharing, it's, if you're an amateur, this happens. If you're a pro, this happens. If you're somebody random, then this happens.
Right.
And then this was exactly in place.
For me, I think that there was some leniency there. Those rules obviously refer to much more standard situations than this. For me, I was actually quite surprised by the ruling. If you look at the account sharing ruling that was specifically around an instance or multiple instances of ELO boosting from last year, people got like warnings and like 14-day suspensions or something like that. There wasn't a financial situation.
Like
and that was an actual instance of ELO boosting. In this case, you had a team that were, like those guys went over there, they were unable to make level 1 accounts, right? Like, that's something that is normally available to anyone who wants to have a second account, right? It's a very different situation from the normal account sharing situations. It was also, I think, for a much more limited time. And from what I can tell, it was in response to some miscommunication from Riot headquarters around this. So, I don't know. I'm actually quite surprised by the... if anything, I thought it would be like a ruling or whatever. I also think Riot Korea probably had some sort of ability to be a little bit more lenient there as well. So it's pretty surprising for me.
Yeah, so I guess doesn't seem likely to me that any of the teams were ever going to actually move over and play in OGN Winter or something like that. That's just such an extreme thing to do for a couple months. So the ban is provocative on that point, but probably not impactful. I also, and maybe this is just elitist of me, but don't consider that amount of money meaningful for pro players given streaming revenue and team support and sponsors and everything else. I'm happy to be proved wrong, I guess. I mean, I would hope that that's not a meaningful amount of money for like pro level, LCS level, big team players, at least in terms of income. Maybe in terms of what they're spending, but they live for free. You know, you've got free room and board and other things.
You can buy a lot of stuff for $1,000.
Right. I assume they can swallow that.
College-age people.
Right. So, you know, I'm not too upset about the consequences. It's interesting that you would think Doublelift might move over later in career. If anything, I would think we've seen the reverse happening, where like Korean players who were aging out of the highest level scene, much like European soccer stars, come to America where the competition is easier and they can still like use their publicity and fame and get more money from that. So it's hard for me to imagine a Korean team taking Doublelift on later in his career after he's washed out of the North American scene.
Yeah.
I mean, we're just talking about within the next 2 years, right? Like, he just hit 21.
Old man.
Last July. Like, he still has several more years on him. I think that this was something he was interested in as well. So it wasn't like something, it's not like what you see in Korea where these guys probably have a hard time finding spots on teams. This was something he was obviously really interested in and has a huge Korean fan base as well. So, I mean, this is a side conversation. But.
Sure. Okay, so let's move on to the other conspiracy-oriented Riot action, which is the secret Worlds draw and how the teams will be allotted into the various groups for the World stage. Any reason to think that Riot would be rigging the system and that teams would need to have extra observers or anything going on there? Is Reddit just flying off the handle and being overly concerned?
I mean, I think there's no real reason. I mean, maybe people have said like, oh, they've been biased against Gambit or whatever, but I think there's no history of them being biased for NA or anything like that. I mean, I don't know who they would even rig it for. Like, I don't know. I think that it's...
I mean, there's a couple things. One, that there are reasons why it would be advantageous for them to rig it, right? And I don't think that they would. But one of the big things is viewership, right? Like, if you can get a top NA team or a popular NA team to progress farther by allowing them to get to, like, the round of 8 much easier, you're going to help out a lot. Like, if your Westerners make it to a round of 8, if that's possible. If they can't get that far, there's very few that get there. It's obviously not as ideal for them running the tournament as it could be.
Well, I think... Actually, they've shown with how they scheduled Worlds this year that they're not looking for the North American audience, actually. They're looking for the Eastern audience in how they've kind of made it more tuned for China and Korea than like North America, which is at 2 or 3 a.m.
If you were rigging for somebody, you'd probably rig for a European team that might not make it. I don't even know that you need
even more so that it's more likely that, like with these times, I would say it's even more likely that they would want a team to make it further because... You know, some people will stay up really late to see Cloud9 go up against, you know, some awesome Korean team, and they are much less likely to do that if you have, like, a just Korean versus China team, right? So I would say that there's even more incentive. Now, I really don't think that they would ever do this. I know these guys pretty well. I see them all the time. I have no doubts about their moral, standing or anything like that. But... to refer to what Monte Cristo said, because a lot of people were like, Monte Cristo thinks that Riot is rigging it. He commented in a Reddit thread around that and basically said, no, it's the opposite. He doesn't think that, and he doesn't want people to be able to think that. Or to say that, right? And this is sort of similar to the reason why the big example that I've mentioned before is like the Oscars and the Academy Awards use PwC, the independent accounting firm, to verify all the voting and all that kind of thing, and act independent and keep the secret in order to, preserve the integrity of the Oscars and make sure that there's no doubt, right? So I actually see a lot of value in trying to make sure that there's like a neutral third party there. Obviously, I wasn't invited to do that, and that's fine. I only volunteered after Monty volunteered me, but I would have liked to see this in the future.
Yeah, I mean the danger of in danger. But the trouble is, once rumors start, they're really hard to quell, and the NBA will probably never live down the kind of specter of like lottery rigging that sort of follows them around year to year. No matter how transparent they try to be, there's just conspiracy theories are easy to sort of spit out whenever you want to, and even like Bill Simmons or really popular sports columnists will refer to it whenever it's handy. So maybe if something starts, suddenly Cloud9 or whoever first place out of NA gets some crazy soft group, and then they're through and whatever, and it's just on from there.
Yeah, I believe that there's a way in which like the top NA team could possibly not face any Asian teams in their group, which would be, you know, if that pops up, it's just like
right. That's top NA and like top SCA maybe in second place something, and EU in third place, international buy team or whatever. Conspiracy. All right.
That would be like worst case scenario after all of this.
Yes. I mean, yeah, that's what, again, like you just don't want, if it is totally random and it does look bad, what do you say at that point other than we didn't do it, which is hard to prove that you're not doing something.
Yeah.
Which is why it'd be nice to have independent verifiers of some kind. But hopefully mountain out of a molehill as usual. Final topic then, and on that subject, so EULCS playoffs starting tomorrow, very early in the morning here in NA. I think it's 1 a.m., the first best of 5. 4 teams left, Alliance, Fnatic, Rocket, SK Gaming. Any predictions, Travis? Who's making it to Worlds?
Well, before we get into my, as always, expert opinion on and 100% accurate predictions on who's making it to Worlds, Hunter, there is a matter that occurred just before the show, since we're talking about Riot and all this stuff around Reginald being fined for announcing Lustboy.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts on that? Should we say anything about that?
I mean, it's hard to know without the rules being out there exactly. I'm curious to see what rule Riot cites for this fine when they do it later, but it's very common in traditional sports for teams not to be able to announce things until the league approves them. They can do hints and other things. A player can certainly tweet something or whatever, but for the team itself to come out and say something ahead of time is really rare. So they just leak stuff. I mean, they're just leaking shit constantly, but they don't come out and say it. So I think there's precedent if Riot does have a rule they can refer to say like, hey, until things are approved, you're not allowed to say stuff. We don't know the amount of money or anything else or the rule. You looked into all the fining history when we were kind of analyzing the CLG fines. Anything there that would
No, I mean, this is like, when I read the tweet, I was completely surprised that they would do this. It's kind of weird, I think, but there's no precedent.
I mean, working with the teams on news announcements and all that kind of thing, I am aware that there are, like, the teams do work hand in hand with Riot on, you know, making sure that they can make these, because one of the big things is that there's like a behavior check that pro players have to go through before they can get into the LCS, and I think Riot likes to have some resources on their side ready for these kind of things as well. So I can understand. I know that there's a history of this kind of thing where Riot needs to be ready in some way.
Right. We learned about the behavior check during the Helios issue, I think, earlier this year, where EG was trying to announce him, but he wasn't cleared. I think it was.
I think it was Lustboy that year.
Was it Lustboy coming over? Yeah. Maybe. Anyway, I understand it from Riot's perspective, especially because at this point they run the broadcast, they run the league, they run the fantasy system and everything else. You don't want to get everybody hyped up about something that you then have to come in and be the bad guy for technicalities, paperwork, who knows. So I sort of understand it. I don't know about a fine or whatever. Yeah. It's hard to know without knowing what kind of private conversations were happening, and if they were like, Reggie, don't say anything no matter what. Like, this isn't approved. We're not totally clear. And he was like, I don't care. I'm tweeting it anyway. But it's just hard to know. It's too far in the background.
Hopefully we can have Reginald or a member of TSM on the show next week to discuss this and gain further insight.
Our first guest, yes. I'm sure Reggie, maybe he's in the area. We can have him in studio. Yeah, well, I am looking forward to Riot's statement on the matter later today, hopefully. That should add a lot of clarity to whatever the situation is.
Reginald claimed that they aren't giving an announcement. He says Riot won't be announcing it.
Well, I don't know. Reggie, as far as I know, does not work for Riot.
Also, this is moments ago, so forgive anyone for who's looking at the show and thinking this is strange. But he just wrote that he said that he's being fined $2,000 because it could hurt the image of the league if he was potentially a drug dealer, criminal, or for whatever reason not allowed to play.
Right. Well, I mean, like I don't know about the drug dealer part, but I think just in general. Well, I'm saying I don't know about the drug dealer part.
I'm saying I'm just processing that. They're concerned that Lustboy was a criminal or a drug dealer.
I mean, a standard thing is to run a background check.
Rejecting a drug dealer from the league hurts the league's image?
No. Allowing a drug dealer in and then having to talk about how this potential player for TSM is a drug dealer or whatever, again, hypothetically, like that, going through that whole conversation, especially publicly, because it's already been announced that he's playing, and then you have to take him back and then say why or whatever. It does bring a lot of risk for Riot and for PR for everybody involved to not wait. And I mean, Travis, you might be able to speak to this more. Do teams run background checks on potential players before they pick them up? Is this part of what they do at all? Or might they mistakenly have hired a drug dealer, pedophile, whatever?
I'm not aware of anyone running background checks or anything like that. I do find it so funny because people, I'm sure, will be able to find this statement, and I'm sure that our news team will be putting it up on the website as well, and by the time the show comes out, people have seen it, but he does this. He's posted. Reggie has posted a pretty long explanation, and he says, "I was also told I couldn't announce any sponsors or players without league approval, even though we're an esports team that has huge personalities in several games like Smite, Hearthstone, and LoL." So it looks like he's really going in on Riot right now, which is pretty funny because you got to figure that after Riot is annoyed with him for announcing a player ahead of time, they probably will not be very happy with this. And there is a rule in the LCS rulebook. People don't really know this. It's not widely known for whatever reason, though I think it's one of the biggest deals ever, that members of a team, including the owner and the players, are not allowed to say anything that could hurt the image of Riot Games or its partners. And that whole what they say is at the discretion of Riot Games as to whether or not it hurts them. So if Riot is angry about this, there's a very good chance that the fine could be it's like the Breakfast Club where it's just going to be like 3,000, 4,000, 5,000.
Yeah. Well, Reggie proving himself to be the Mark Cuban of esports by racking up large fines for complaining about things and then complaining.
I love it when you make obscure sports references.
That's not even obscure. That's like totally mainstream. Mark Cuban. Shark Tank. Do you watch Shark Tank? He's like on regular television all the time.
Is that like a Discovery show?
No, unrelated. Unrelated. Okay, but like sharks, we will only swim forwards, except backwards. Bad segue to EU predictions. Yes, good idea, Travis. Yes. But we'll come to you last then, since you've stalled long enough. Spellsy, 4 teams left. Who makes it to Worlds?
So I think the thing about EU is this split, like NA and last split, they have 2 really strong teams at the top. They have Fnatic and Alliance. So I think those guys are getting through, like, without a question almost. I mean, of course, it's going to maybe bite me in the butt or whatever if they don't, but they're very highly favored, I think. And then, so it comes down between SK and Rocket. And I think, I've not been an SK fan, even though they stomped Millennium. And I think that they're kind of on a downward trend, while I think Rocket's on an upward trend. So I'm actually thinking Rocket's going to go as the 3rd team, which would be pretty crazy because they're kind of a low, small fan team. Yeah. They're all Polish, I think.
Right. If you're cursed, you got to be excited if Rocket makes it because you're trying to ride that same Rocket trajectory of like late season surge all the way into Worlds.
Yeah, that's true.
I agree. I think Fnatic and Alliance clearly look like the strongest 2 teams. I'd probably put Fnatic first, or Alliance first and Fnatic second, and then it's sort of a toss-up between Rocket and SK. I'm going to go out and say that I think SK's experience and veteran, kind of playoff experience will help them overcome Rocket in the 3rd, 4th place match and get the last spot to Worlds.
Yeah.
Travis?
I mean, yeah, I think a lot of people are saying Fnatic and Alliance. I think Gambit is going to... No, I'm just kidding. Fnatic and Alliance, I think, are pretty much easy picks. And then I still feel like SK is a pretty easy pick over Rocket. A lot of people discount the best of 5 and best of 3 experience that a lot of these teams have because, especially when you're playing on stage, because that stuff is so much different than a best of 1, right? Like all season long, you play best of 1s, and I think that longer best ofs for playoffs and that kind of thing are going to be something that we see again and again over the course of the next couple of weeks, where these guys have the people that have the better experience in those things and being able to respond to, okay, they did the strategy. We don't have 2-3 weeks to prepare for how to counteract that or wait till the patch shifts or whatever. It's like we have about 10 minutes to change our picks and bans for next.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I think SK will have that.
Yeah, certainly I think that experience ought to be beneficial. We find out, in theory, the longer series lead to the better team winning. That's the idea, so we can only assume.
Yeah.
I mean, I think SK is the better team. I assume they'll win.
Yeah, I don't know. I think they've been on a downward trend, and Millennium just got crushed by Super Hot Crew, while Rocket just beat Super Hot Crew. So I think maybe they got a little bit easier matchup in the first round, and there might be a little bit overestimated, I think.
So big difference this year and last year, between this year and last year, in terms of how valuable first place is in coming out of a region. You got a bye last year. This year you just get the #1 spot. How hard do you think the two teams will be going, whatever two teams they are, for that first place finish? How valuable is it in reality this year?
I think maybe last year I remember the third place match being more hyped than the first place match. I think that this year the first place match is going to be hyped because the seedings, I think, are important.
Yeah.
And so if it's between Fnatic and Alliance, I kind of think, honestly, Fnatic might have the edge.
They certainly do have more like this particular group has more best-of-5 experience together than Alliance.
And they have won like every other one of all of EU LCS, I think.
Yeah, while we're discussing the hype and value around first and second and third, it was really crazy because if you guys remember last year, there was pretty big controversy around Lemon Dogs just showing up and getting stomped after supposedly having partied all night the night before.
Right.
Which I think was really interesting. I disagree that the first and second place match will be the most hype, especially when we get to NA, where my prediction is we'll see TSM versus CLG for third and fourth. But I don't know. Yeah, I think that first place will be really interesting. I want to give it a Fnatic because, again, like the experience that they have year over year is pretty big. So
yeah, okay.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to see like the Alliance versus Fnatic, we did a little bit in the Thorn Theories video, and so Fnatic in the second half of the season is like 9-3, I think, or in their last 12 games. While Alliance has lost like 4 or 5 of their last their last dozen games, and so Fnatic is coming in kind of hotter than Alliance actually, but Alliance is still the favorite team. They have a higher record and all that kind of stuff, I think.
Well, we'll find out this weekend. And that's it for this week's episode. I'm Hunter Leigh. You can follow me on Twitter at HunterBLeigh. Spellsy?
I'm Spellsy, and you can follow me at SpellsyLOL.
Travis?
I'm Travis, and you can follow me at SOTLTravis. And you can also check out, by the way, the article and video that Spellsy just mentioned, Thorn's Theories, a statistical investigation of Alliance, at ongamers.com.
All right. See you next week.